The cryptocurrency markets are frantically attempting to establish a floor at this very moment, and in this video I'm going to walk you through several charts that you absolutely must be monitoring. Well, folks, these charts are appearing significantly more volatile today, and they're telling an incredibly important narrative. So in this video we're going to dive deep into that, discuss some areas for potential optimism, and also address something developing overnight that leads me to believe we might experience slightly more downside ahead. Make sure you stay engaged for the entire presentation. There's substantial material to discuss, and I'm also going to reveal what the largest whales in XRP are currently doing. Remain until the conclusion for that because it's exceptionally critical. And as always, your engagement is tremendously valuable to this channel. Thank you to everyone who invests the time to like the video and subscribe. Those straightforward actions genuinely support me more than you realize. Also, brief note before we begin. If you possess available capital, this is most likely the moment you should be contemplating accumulation. If we examine what I consider to be the single most crucial chart at this moment, the one that demonstrates maximum capitulation throughout the market, specifically concerning XRP, we can observe something that should honestly make you pause. We just reached what appears to be the most capitulative threshold in XRP's entire history. This chart is reflecting extreme panic flooding into the market. It's displaying the most oversold conditions we've witnessed in XRP historically. And folks, it's not even remotely close. We have only been at this threshold one previous time in XRP's history, and that occurred after the Terra Luna collapse and the FTX collapse when the entire sector was imploding and the headlines were relentless. And we are at that identical threshold right now. So let's be absolutely clear. We are observing one of the most severe crashes in cryptocurrency history, comparable to virtually no other decline outside of those catastrophic events. That's the intensity of stress the market is communicating we're experiencing. Now, I understand some of you watching this video are thinking, okay, how much more severe can this possibly become, or when do we finally establish the bottom? And I want to address that directly because if you've endured this far and you're still present, there's no question we are exceptionally close to the conclusion of this movement. XRP has never been this oversold previously, where several days later, several weeks later, we aren't definitively establishing a floor. So I'm going to state one thing that I believe is very reasonable to say based on the historical evidence. We are exceptionally close to a bottom. What precise price point is that going to be, folks? It's anyone's speculation, and I want to be transparent about that. Anyone claiming they can identify the exact low to the penny is either deceiving you or they're about to receive a reality check. Now, if there is one individual who has been completely accurate about this crash from the beginning, it's been blockchain backer. What does he have to communicate? He says the bottom isn't established yet. He hasn't witnessed the massive liquidation event he's anticipating. He's still waiting for his limit orders to be executed. So blockchain backer is still anticipating this situation to complete. And look, we'll see if he ultimately proves correct because he's been remarkably accurate up to this point. But I think ultimately the most significant takeaway here is that it's essentially like shooting fish in a barrel at this stage. Whether you're accumulating at 125, 115, 113, 105, I mean, the entire market has deteriorated. I don't think precisely selecting the exact entry price is the most critical component right now. The most critical component is the broader strategic decision. If you possess liquidity, if you have capital reserves, this is the opportunity window where you deploy it. I think it's that straightforward. I think attempting to overcomplicate this and pressuring yourself to identify the absolute bottom is not a productive strategy for most individuals. And ultimately, when you examine capitulation throughout history, especially on this chart, this communicates the complete narrative. You cannot identify a period in XRP's history where XRP declined and capitulated to thresholds like this, and it wasn't effectively a floor within a relatively compressed time frame afterward. When you arrive at these thresholds, it's maximum oversold conditions. Whether the bottom is established right this instant, or whether it's 10 cents lower, 5 cents lower, or whether we experience one final violent wick, we don't have certainty. But what we do have certainty about is that within this relative time window, we are exceptionally close to ultimate capitulation. Unless XRP executes something that it has never executed before historically, unless we enter a type of unwind and forced liquidation that is unique and unprecedented, then the trajectory forward typically appears identical. You experience that final moment of despair, you experience a shakeout, and then you begin to witness the reversal phase commence. Now, in terms of why this is transpiring, I want to show you another chart that I think is exceptionally interesting. This isn't going to communicate the entire narrative, but it illustrates a picture. We are witnessing Bitcoin trading remarkably similarly to software equities right now. In other words, correlation is elevated. And I understand some individuals are going to debate about Bitcoin as a hedge or Bitcoin as digital gold. But when the market is in complete risk-off mode, correlations compress, things trade together. So why are these assets correlated? There are numerous theories. One could be the reverse carry trade. You've got capital borrowed inexpensively overseas, particularly connected to Japan in many people's perspectives, deployed into risk-on assets, and when volatility spikes and risk appetite vanishes, the unwind initiates. Another could simply be that the identical institutions that accumulate into high-growth technology are also the identical institutions that allocate to cryptocurrency. And when they minimize exposure, they minimize it universally. But ultimately, I believe there are two factors that have fundamentally fractured the market in this current event. The first is what transpired with Binance the other day, the so-called 10-10 event, maximum liquidity, maximum pain, and liquidations occurring in a manner that resembled a feedback loop. The second is the broader risk-off appetite entering the market. And here's what genuinely makes me think we might have slightly more to decline. It's not exclusively crypto. If you examine what occurred with Amazon stock, it's getting absolutely demolished after hours, despite the reality that earnings weren't even that catastrophic. That's what risk-off resembles. It's fear, it's de-risking, it's algorithms liquidating, it's funds reducing exposure, and it frequently has very minimal connection to the fundamentals in the moment. Now, where did that fear originate from? A significant number of people are pointing to what's being communicated around Trump's new Federal Reserve selection. Someone who is perceived as more hawkish, someone who could maintain interest rates elevated and operate a more contractionary environment. And let me just express this. I would be shocked if Trump selects someone who arrives and executes the exact identical thing as Jerome Powell, considering Trump has complained about elevated rates perpetually. That would be a massive policy miscalculation. Imagine selecting someone and then complaining about the person you selected because they're executing exactly what you stated you despised. As much as I'd prefer to think that won't transpire, who has certainty? The market is clearly reacting to uncertainty. There's a substantial amount of fear surrounding where rates proceed, where liquidity proceeds, and what that signifies for risk assets. And regardless of whether that fear is justified, the market is still communicating one thing: emotions are exaggerated. That's how you arrive at the oversold territory we're experiencing right now. So you're going to witness people proposing different reasons and narratives, attempting to see what resonates. But for me, the most persuasive factors for where we are right now are: 1, the Binance 10-10 event, that liquidation loop, and 2, the reverse carry trade unwind, or at minimum, a broader forced deleveraging event. Because here's the reality. The only mechanism you experience the kind of capitulation we're witnessing right now is if substantial firms are imploding on the back end. You don't experience this intensity of selling pressure simply because retail investors became frightened. Retail cannot accomplish this by themselves. This resembles forced selling. Funds, firms, leverage positions, systematic strategies, all being unwound. If you combine what transpired with Binance with what's transpiring in broader markets, what you might be observing is the slow-motion collapse of positions behind the scenes. Individuals who were on the incorrect side of volatility, individuals who were over-leveraged, individuals who were executing the carry trade, individuals who were long risk in a manner they couldn't sustain once the market reversed. And that's why it's challenging for me to believe we emerge on the other side of this without someone going bankrupt. I don't know who it's going to be. I'm not going to pretend I possess the inside information, but someone is offside here. It's blatantly obvious if you examine the magnitude and compare this to other events in cryptocurrency history. When we return to this capitulation chart, the only event that even approaches this is Terra Luna plus FTX. You can also examine the COVID-19 crash as another massive one, and you can examine the early Federal Reserve hiking cycle as another significant drawdown. But in this current event, the reality that not a single substantial public headline has completely emerged yet makes me think the narrative becomes obvious in retrospect within the next several weeks. Someone is probably going to emerge as the entity who was forced selling enormous amounts behind the scenes to remain solvent. We don't possess that answer yet, but I think we can identify the probable chain of events. Binance event triggers liquidations and feedback loops. Macro fear spikes and risk assets dump. Carry trades unwind. Substantial players minimize exposure. Forced selling accelerates the movement. It all compounds. And when it compounds, the market doesn't gently drift lower. It collapses. That's what capitulation resembles. It's emotional. It's violent. It feels like the world is terminating. And that's why it's so challenging for most individuals to accumulate in these moments, because it feels irresponsible to purchase something that is free falling. But historically, those are the moments that create the most substantial opportunities. Now, speaking of mindset, Brad Garlinghouse actually commented on all of this. He's essentially echoing the classic principle, be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. And right now he's stating this is the moment to be greedy when others are fearful. And honestly, I agree with that in a general sense. I never thought in a million years we would arrive at this point. There have been periods in history where I've been negative on what was transpiring in XRP, especially during the Terra Luna and FTX blowup. That was a moment where I thought things were clearly going to deteriorate and there was no alternative path forward. But what's been peculiar about this current event is the absence of information. Not in a million years did I think that with the quantity of positive developments we were witnessing in the ecosystem, things could become this negative this rapidly. That's why I keep returning to the identical conclusion. The only mechanism you witness this magnitude is if something has been disintegrating behind the scenes, and we haven't yet received the public-facing confirmation. I've already witnessed headlines about some smaller entities going under, but I don't think those are substantial enough to cause what we've witnessed across the entire market. Someone larger is offside. Someone bigger is getting squeezed. Someone bigger is being forced to unwind. And that brings us to the segment of the video you genuinely need to pay attention to. What are the largest players executing? What are the whales executing? How are they reacting? Before we examine that data real quick, if you want to proceed deeper with me and actually possess a structured system for moments like this, the 100X Club is where I position all the actionable material. Inside, you'll receive the XRP Millionaire Blueprint, exclusive weekly stock alerts for high potential stock opportunities, and a step-by-step approach to learn to expand your wealth without getting shaken out by volatility. If that sounds like what you've been searching for, it's in the pinned comment. All right, now let's discuss whales. Examine this metric. Accounts with more than 1 million XRP. It's rising. It's been growing since September 2025, since this sell-off initiated. And this is what you typically witness when the market approaches capitulation. When you witness the market enter into these lows, the biggest players begin accumulating. They purchase when it feels the worst, and they sell when it feels the best. So there's one substantial thing we have to extract from this sell-off. This has nothing to do with XRP fundamentals. That has never been more transparent. Whales are accumulating. They're purchasing the dip. Brad is basically pounding the table about fear versus greed. Something is imploding somewhere. Someone who held substantial quantities of these assets is going under, or at minimum is being forced to minimize exposure. There's a liquidation spiral, and eventually assets get repriced to where they should be after the forced seller is completed. That's what we're dealing with. So if you were to ask me to assign probabilities on it, like if I had to be a wagering individual, are we within 30 days of the bottom right now? Are we within 10 to 15 days of the bottom? I would assign that at a 95% to 99% probability. I genuinely do believe we're that close. I think there's probably one final liquidation spike remaining, one more shakeout, one more moment of despair, and that's why the overnight action is significant. Amazon being down roughly 10% after hours is not a positive sign for what we could witness tomorrow across risk assets. When major technology is getting hit, crypto frequently follows in the short term. If we experience another broad risk-off day, crypto could witness one more leg down simply because correlations are elevated and fear is contagious. But even if that transpires, it doesn't alter the bigger picture. We are in the zone. We are in the window where these situations historically reverse. That doesn't signify it reverses today at 2 p.m. It doesn't signify it reverses at a specific price point. It signifies we're in the region where generational opportunities are typically created. And that's why I'm calling this what it is, a potential generational buying opportunity, a potential generational bottom for XRP. This could be one of those moments that individuals look back on for years and years and state, I cannot believe I didn't take advantage of that. And if you're someone who doesn't possess dry powder right now, remember this feeling, burn it into your brain. Because the next time you feel like this, when everything feels hopeless, when everyone is panicking, when you feel sick examining your portfolio, that's frequently when the best opportunities are formed. You have to be conservative before moments like this. You protect capital, you wait, you don't chase hype. Then when the blood is in the streets, you deploy. That's the game. That's how this operates. Now, do I think the exact bottom is already established? I'm not certain. I'm still waiting for slightly more capitulation. Blockchain backer is still waiting for that final liquidation moment. I'm still waiting for one final shakeout, but it seems like we are genuinely close. There are probably several more dominoes remaining to fall, several more events that have to surface publicly. There are some bigger players that I'm monitoring to see if they can remain solvent. But regardless of how chaotic the final minutes of the sell-off become, the takeaway doesn't change. The market is at historic oversold thresholds. Whales are accumulating, and forced selling is the only thing that makes this magnitude make sense. Let me add some additional context here that I think is important to understand. When we look at previous major bottoms in crypto history, there are always common characteristics. First, you see extreme fear, which we clearly have now. Second, you see whale accumulation, which is happening. Third, you see mainstream media declaring crypto dead, which we're starting to see more of. Fourth, you see forced liquidations from over-leveraged positions, which is clearly occurring. What's interesting about this particular moment is how quickly it developed. In previous cycles, we typically had more warning signs, more time to prepare. This time, the velocity of the decline has been exceptional, which actually suggests to me that the recovery could be equally violent when it comes. Think about the COVID crash in March 2020. The decline was swift and brutal, but the recovery was equally aggressive. Within weeks, we were making new highs. Now, I'm not saying that exact pattern will repeat, but the principle remains. When you get forced liquidation events, when you get panic selling, when you get maximum pain, the snapback can be just as extreme as the decline. Another thing to consider is the broader macroeconomic environment. Yes, we're seeing some uncertainty around Federal Reserve policy and interest rates, but let's be realistic about where we are in the cycle. Inflation has come down significantly from its peaks. The economy, while slowing, is not collapsing. Corporate earnings, outside of a few tech names, have been relatively stable. What we're witnessing is fear overwhelming fundamentals temporarily, and that's exactly when the smartest money steps in. That's exactly when generational wealth gets created, not when everything feels safe and comfortable, but when it feels like the world is ending. I also want to address something that I think is being overlooked. The regulatory environment for crypto, particularly in the United States, has actually improved dramatically over the past year. We've seen more clarity, more acceptance, more institutional adoption. XRP specifically has benefited from positive legal developments. None of that has changed. None of that fundamental progress has been erased by this price action. What's happening right now is purely technical. Forced selling, liquidations, deleveraging. It's not a fundamental rejection of the asset class. It's not a fundamental problem with XRP's utility or adoption. It's simply the market doing what markets do, overreacting in both directions. So when you're sitting here wondering if you should be accumulating, ask yourself this. Do you believe in the long-term thesis? Do you believe crypto is going to zero and never recovering? Do you believe XRP has no future utility? If the answer to those questions is no, then the logical conclusion is that this represents opportunity, not danger. Now, I want to be very clear about risk management here because I think it's important. Just because we're likely near a bottom doesn't mean you should be reckless. It doesn't mean you should go all in with money you can't afford to lose. It doesn't mean you should use leverage. What it means is that if you have capital you've been holding for moments like this, if you have a long-term investment horizon, if you can handle additional volatility in the short term, then this is exactly the type of environment where patient capital gets rewarded. The worst thing you can do is panic sell at the bottom. The second worst thing you can do is have dry powder and be too scared to deploy it when the opportunity presents itself. Both of those mistakes come from the same place, letting emotions override logic and data. What does the data tell us? Historic oversold conditions, whale accumulation, extreme fear, forced selling likely near completion. These are all characteristics of major bottoms. They're not guarantees, but they're strong probabilities based on historical patterns. One more thing I want to emphasize, and this is critical, is the importance of perspective. If you're someone who bought near the recent highs and you're looking at significant losses right now, I understand that's painful. But zoom out. Look at where XRP was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Look at the progress that's been made. Look at the adoption that's happening. Look at the real-world utility being built. Short-term price action, even when it's this violent, doesn't change the long-term trajectory. What it does is create entry points for those who have patience and conviction. It shakes out weak hands and rewards strong hands. That's how markets have always worked, and that's how they'll continue to work. So as we wrap this up, here's what I want you to take away. We are very likely in the final stages of this capitulation. Whether the exact bottom is in or we have one more leg down doesn't matter as much as understanding we're in the zone. Whales are accumulating. Fear is extreme. Forced selling appears to be nearing completion. The risk-reward at these levels favors buyers with a long-term horizon. If you have capital to deploy, this is the type of environment where it makes sense to start building positions. Not all at once necessarily, but methodically, strategically, with proper risk management. And if you don't have capital right now, use this as a learning experience for the next cycle. Remember how this feels. Remember the fear. Remember the panic. Because that's what opportunity looks like in real time. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this update helped you see the situation more clearly and gave you a framework for how to think about what comes next. If you want the XRP Millionaire Blueprint, exclusive weekly stock alerts, and the full 100x Club toolkit, so you can actually capitalize on volatility instead of fearing it. And if you got value out of this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Because when this market turns, and it will turn, you're going to want to be positioned properly. You're going to want to have the right information, and you're going to want to be part of a community that understands how to navigate these environments. Stay strong, stay strategic, and remember, the best opportunities often come disguised as disasters. This might be one of those moments. Don't let fear prevent you from recognizing it.